This happened 3 or 4 years ago, and I randomly reflect on it every now and again. At the time, I was home from college for the summer, and my parents were out of town with my sister for a dance competition, and I was tasked with taking care of the house and our dogs while they were all away. It was either a Friday or Saturday night, and I had some friends over to drink, hang out, and then go to the bar. We lost track of time, catching up and having fun, and decided to head to the bar at about 11:15 p.m. One of my friends lived about a 5-minute walk from my house, and realized he had left his ID, well, his entire wallet in fact, at home. So he ran ahead to get his wallet, whilst my other friend and I cleaned up a little bit, got a roadie and headed over to meet him where we were all going to call our Uber. For context, my parents' house is in a residential area just outside of the city, so it's filled with families and old couples, etc. So as my friend and I head out, we noticed a man was walking his German Shepherd a little ways behind us in the same direction we were going. Though we both remarked that it was strange a man was walking his dog close to midnight on the weekend, we just carried on. We were both 21 at the time, and we're walking with a red Solo cup and just chatting. But as we got within about a minute of my other friend's house, my friend leaned in close to me and said, "I think this guy is getting closer to us." I nervously glanced over my shoulder and disagreed with him in an attempt to stop any panic. I then looked back at him, and as I did, my friend did the same and yelled, "Oh my God, yes he is." And I kid you not, as I heard this, I looked back and the man and the dog broke into a full-on sprint. My friend and I freaked out, threw our cups down and booked it. When we got to my friend's house, we ran up the driveway, got to his side door, only to find it was locked. We aggressively banged on the door, thinking this guy and his dog were going to attack us, but they just stood at the end of the driveway, looking at us. My friend screamed at the guy, asking what he wanted and why he was chasing us. Getting a good look at him now too, we could tell the guy was older and had a scruffy voice. "You're trespassing," he replied. We both yelled back in unison that this was our friend's place and we were waiting for him to come out. I was freaking out at this point and trying to catch my breath to yell at him. "Who are you? Neighborhood watch or something?" "Yep," he replied. Now my family has lived in the same house for my entire life, and I have never once heard of there being a neighborhood watch, let alone a neighborhood watch that patrols the streets late at night. After his answer, he and the dog turned and walked away. There was a pretty large brick wall on either side of the driveway too, so once they'd walked away, we could no longer see them. Then right at that moment, my friend came out of his house with his wallet, asking what we were yelling about, and to shut up as his parents were sleeping. Our Uber arrived just at the same time, so I ran to it at the end of the driveway, then looked down the street and didn't see a thing. I asked the driver if he had just seen a man and a dog walking down the street. "No," he replied. "I just came from back there," pointing in the direction we had seen the man and dog go, "and I didn't see anyone or anything just now. Not once have I seen that man or dog since, and it still haunts me to this day."
This happened back in 2009, but after finding this sub, I felt compelled to share. My husband and I were 21, just moved into our first apartment, and I was about 6 months pregnant. The small one-bedroom apartment we found wasn't one of those nicer, corporately owned communities. It was more like a slumlord situation, but rent was cheap and we were just getting started in life. Now, a little backstory. The city we were in was still close to family, and my husband had a great aunt we knew lived nearby. She was one of those family members we would only see at big family reunions, so it wasn't like we had a close relationship. As a great aunt, she was one of like 13 children. You know, back in the day when everyone had 1,000 kids, and she had been married for many years with 4 of her own children. They were all mostly grown up, but Being that this was over a decade ago, her youngest was maybe 16 or so at the time. We hardly ever saw him at reunions because he was one of those gang-banging kids that was always getting into trouble. Apart from his poor choices, he was born with a very striking facial deformity that really gave him a unique appearance. We'll call him E. So we had just moved in 2 weeks prior to this incident. I was only working part-time, so I came home early in the day and continued to unpack and organize until my husband got home in the evenings. Our then English bulldog was my faithful companion, and although they have a lazy stigma, she was a great guard dog. So it was early evening and there was still light out when I started hearing banging or prying of some sort coming from the back of the apartment where our bedroom was. On the other side of our bedroom, the back wall faced the parking lot, so we got a significant amount of noise when people came and went. At first, I figured it had to be a gardener or someone loading things from their car. As the noise continued, I realized it was right up against that wall. I peeked out our window, but due to the angle, I really couldn't see much. This noise obviously aggravated our dog, who wouldn't stop barfing. You dog owners know what I'm talking about. And it was starting to make me scared. Cheap rent came with some shady neighbors, and we quickly realized this wasn't going to be a long-term residence. So, this noise continued. My dog continued to barf, and I was getting freaked out because I couldn't see anything outside our window and I didn't have the guts to go investigate. I was really pregnant, and I don't like running even when not pregnant. Finally, my husband made it home just as it's getting dark, and at this point I hadn't heard the noise for nearly an hour. Of course, I tell him right away that I had been freaked out for the last few hours because of banging, prying, and moving going on outside. So yes, he went to investigate and came back saying nothing seemed out of place. Later that same night, we had made dinner, eaten, and my husband was shaving in the bathroom getting ready to take a shower before bed. Suddenly I hear him yell, "Hey!" in the deepest booming voice I had ever heard. I come quickly running to the living room and I see my husband in his boxers stretched from just outside the bathtub with both his hands on the small windows still inside the shower and tub. I ask him what happened, and he turns with an alarming look on his face and says, "Someone's cut the screen." I had chills go straight down my spine and was basically frozen. He yelled for them to get out of here, when some more movement started happening and he slammed the window shut and locked it. This is the uncomfortable part. As soon as he turned around again, out of breath, he says to me, "That was my cousin E." I was so shocked. I asked him if he was sure, and he says he could recognize that face anywhere. And then he started questioning what the odds were that E recognized him, and to this day we really didn't know. Immediately following the incident, we had the manager replace the screen and I placed a dowel in the window to keep it shut. We lasted 9 months in that complex and will never rent from a slumlord again. We have also not seen E since, even before the incident at a family reunion. About 2 years ago, we found out he had been incarcerated and isn't due to be released until 2022. We don't know what the charges were. The family keeps the situation hush-hush, but I truly hope we don't ever see him again. I was 19 years old at the time. I had a really good opportunity to go to college, but things fell through a couple of months into it, and basically, I wasn't allowed to go back at that college. I'm not going to go into the details, but I found myself stuck. I was living at home with my parents and working at McDonald's most of the time. I was really disappointed in myself, especially because I didn't have anyone else to blame but myself. I seemed to be your typical college dropout that ended up working at fast food. But while I was working there, I had a couple of really strange experiences. So the first one happened like this. There was this really creepy customer. He was an old man, and he just seemed like the most insane individual ever. You just have to think of the physical embodiment of Florida man. He always wore this bathroom robe with a stained white t-shirt underneath. Or shoes. He had these really old Nikes that seemed like they had been completely covered in mud and never washed. Everywhere he stepped, there was some residue coming off of his shoes. I don't know how far he lived, but this guy came in to eat at McDonald's 4 or 5 times a day for as long as I worked there. I never personally had any horrible experiences with him. It wasn't like he was this unruly customer. He always asked for extra ketchup, but it's not like that was a crime or anything. The story is weird because I remember talking about him with some of my coworkers. I had one friend there that I became rather close with. I remember talking with her about this creepy guy that had just came in to eat McDonald's all the time wearing his pajamas. When you work with the public, there are so many people and faces that you see all the time, and none of them mean anything. It's just another customer. But when you have someone like this, it almost makes the job a little bit more bearable. As weird as that might sound, a little bit more consistency to the job. Plus, making jokes about someone like that was kind of fun. But there was one day when the jokes weren't funny anymore, because he stopped coming in. They couldn't find out why either. I mean, when you see someone multiple times a day, every day for months on end, you get a little surprised when they stop showing up. It all just seemed, I don't know, unusual. I remember talking to my friend about it. Neither of us could imagine why he stopped. I remember getting a phone call at 2 a.m. that night, though. I guess my friend had gotten curious and looked around online. She's a bit of an insomniac. I guess he had been arrested on multiple drug charges. She had found a picture of him in the public database for our county's police department. In the mugshot, he was wearing that exact same bathrobe that we always saw him wearing. That was interesting. Really weird to think that someone I saw and interacted with multiple times a day was an actual dealer. But I guess that was that. My other experience working at McDonald's was really bad. Not going to lie to you, it really freaks me out and really made me question humanity. So it happened like this, right? I was working the graveyard shift. It must have been around 12 a.m. and we didn't have any customers. We already cleaned all the machines as much as we could, and there really wasn't anything to do. We lived in a smaller community, so there weren't too many people coming in to eat at such a late hour. We had a few here and there, but we were mostly just sitting around, particularly slow this night. I remember going over to check the garbage cans for the other side of the store. Occasionally, we would forget to empty that garbage pail. It was directly behind a booth and out of sight from the area we normally worked in. I remember going over there and there were 2 big bags of garbage that needed to be taken out. They were too heavy to take out at the same time, so I did what any sane person would do. I carried one out at a time. I remember bringing the first one. I threw it into the dumpster, and I remember hurting my back a little when I did it. I went for a little bit of a theatrical throw and really felt it there. I went back into the store to get the second bag of garbage, and I made my way outside. I got about 10 feet away from the dumpster when I saw something that shocked me. I dropped the bag of garbage. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a mutilated puppy. Its entire snout had been cut off. I wasn't sure if it was alive or not. It wasn't moving or anything. I took a step closer to try to see a little bit more, and I just felt my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen in person. It was definitely dead. It wasn't leaning up against the dumpster, and it was just a horrifying thing to see. I ran back inside and asked my coworkers what we should do. We decided to call the police, but they didn't really help much. We were really freaked out at who could have possibly done this and why they would put the puppy there of all places. And the part that still freaks me out is that whoever had done this had been waiting for me to go back inside of the building, and in the few seconds before I came back out, put it right next to the dumpster. I figured they must have been watching me. Didn't know what else to think about it, though. Our McDonald's didn't have an outside camera other than the drive-thru, so there was no hope of trying to identify the person that did this. But it still makes me sick to my stomach to think what that person could be like.
I was around 11 or 13 at the time. I would always love to go into the woods to just have some fun with my cousins, but sometimes I would stay in my backyard. Sometime in the middle of June that year, something happened that would change the way that I saw those woods. I was attempting to stay the night in my treehouse. It must have been only a few hours until dawn at the time. The treehouse is located at the edge of the woods, and I was alone at the time, or so I thought. I climbed into the treehouse and looked out the window. It was then that I realized I was pretty thirsty, so I decided to go down and walk towards my house. Around that time, I got this feeling that someone or something was watching me. I ignored it and thought it was at most some wild animal. I made it into my house and grabbed my bottle, which had some Myuu in it, which was my favorite drink as a child. As I exited the house, I noticed that our old blonde lab had followed me. He was a good dog. I gave him a quick pet, then went on my way to the treehouse. As I entered the treehouse, I looked out the window, glancing back in the direction of my dog. I noticed that he was no longer watching me. He was instead staring into one particular part of the woods. I'd never seen my dog do that before. If there was something that piqued his interest, he would go check it out. I'd never seen him just stay still like that, as if he was scared. But then he began to make this low, deep growl. I called out to him, "Rocky, what do you see, boy?" He turned to look up at me, but only for a split second, then went right back to staring at that spot in the woods. It started to rain and thunder, but along with those sounds came another, a sort of humming that was coming from my right. Immediately, I felt scared, chilled to the bone. I looked out the window that was facing the direction of that sound. I saw it, something that horrified me, that didn't make sense. A creature that I'd never seen or heard of before. It was standing at the forest floor and was a little too close to the treehouse. It was big, skinny, brown. It was looking up at my treehouse with reddish-brown eyes. I thought to myself, do I run to the house, or do I stay up here? I crouched beneath the window so that it could not see me, and I decided to stay until morning. The next day, I hurried down the treehouse and began to run as fast as I could out of the woods. After that incident, I didn't want to go into the woods ever again, because whatever that thing was could still be lurking out there, waiting for its next meal.